Tonight, we're going somewhere our eyes are useless. Imagine a river the colour of ink, choked with silt, whipped by storms, and so murky that noon looks like midnight. And yet something out there is hunting. Perfectly. It doesn't blink, it doesn't hesitate. It feels you before it sees you, if it ever sees you at all. Before we step into the water, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Because the creature we're meeting turned a prehistoric desert river into a sensory trap, and scientists are still arguing over how it pulled this off. The sky breaks like a bruise and the river answers with a sound you feel in your ribs before you hear it. A rolling all-body shudder as clay banks collapse and the current swallows them whole. Cretaceous North Africa, roughly 95 million years ago. Not a golden desert postcard, but a drenched, swollen arc of channels and floodplain. A machine built to grind mountains into mud. Monsoon rain chews at the highlands and drags their bones downstream in sheets of silt. The water is already the colour of tea, and then it turns darker, thick enough to gulp. You could hold your hand a knuckle's length from your nose and see nothing. Noon here often looks like midnight, and tonight, thanks to a wall of storm, it's worse. The Kem rivers don't flow, they heave. Plants bend like prayer flags along the margins, fern thickets, conifer shadows, palms with fronds torn into confetti by the wind. Insects buzz as if the air itself is electrified. A dragonfly the size of your hand veers and is erased by rain. Something with a shell, think tortoise, but built like a helmet, pushes stubbornly through the reeds and immediately regrets the decision. The ground has turned from earth into rumour, a thin crust on soup. One step, two, and your weight is negotiating with quicksand. Farther out, the channel's main body is a churning amphitheatre where everyone performs one act: survival. The water doesn't just look black, it behaves like it. Light enters and doesn't come back. Grains of clay and silt stay suspended, jokingly small but together powerful, scattering every photon sideways until vision dissolves into grey. The physics is cruel and simple. In a transparent river, eyes rule. In a loaded one, the river blinds you on purpose. It's carrying cargo, sediment, tannins from rotted plants, the very dust of continents, and the price of that freight is darkness. Listen instead. The river is broadcasting. There's the deep, slow whomp of something huge rolling near the bottom, coelacanth-sized, scales like wet ceramic plates. There's the jittery silver static of a school of bony fish turning in panic, their bodies writing zigzags into the pressure field. There's the parchment tear of a lungfish roiling the surface for a breath, gulping air because sometimes gills aren't enough. And there are the mistakes. A sudden splash where a saw-snouted ray, Oncha pristis, all cartilage and knives, clips a submerged log and sends a pulse that travels like a secret through the black. Every movement here is a confession. On the sandbar that won't remain a sandbar for long, a crocodilian lies like a rotted tree trunk that grew teeth. Its skull is narrow and needle-edged. Its eyes are domes that may as well be closed. It knows the script. Hold absolutely still, let the water translate the world to your face through a million tiny tremors, and only then move. This is an old trick, older than most dinosaurs, and the crocodilian has used it to make a living for millions of years. Tonight, though, it's not the only professional in the room. Downstream, a shadow taller than any crocodile's patient slides in, leaving almost no surface trace, just a faint ridge where rain dimples turn to gloss and fall away. You don't see it arrive. You notice that the river suddenly has a centre, a gravity. If the darkness had eyes, it would be looking at you from over there. A fin-like tail works once, half a gesture, a suggestion, and the shadow resets among drowned tree limbs, becomes architecture. When it exhales, the bubble stream climbs in a string of pearls that vanish into froth. Everything smells like iron and green rot. The warm, coin-thin tang of blood rubbed into wet leaves. You taste grit every time you swallow. The wind brings a momentary brightness and then another curtain of rain. Lightning throws a white noise photograph across the channel. The glint of armoured fish scales, the pale flash of a turtle's playstron, the brief geometry of a sailback slicing the frame, and gone. You could argue you imagined it. Your heart, which appreciates the value of denial, votes yes. Along the bank, the floodplain is breaking apart into islands, toppled trunks, mats of reeds, whole wedges of shoreline marching out into the current like doomed parade floats. Frogs ride them, insects hitchhike. A small theropod, chicken smart coyote nervy, darts from one raft sickle to another and thinks heroic thoughts about land. The river is not interested in land. It takes what land offers, turns it and eats it. When the water gets like this, opaque, muscular, full of tumble and noise, the day shift predators lose their edge. Tall, binocular vision hunters who strut on shore and rely on clean sightlines become cautious, then absent. Even crocodilians keep low, preferring predictable eddies. But the black water belongs to a different specialist, a creature that treats darkness not as a handicap, but as habitat. The more chaotic it gets, the calmer it becomes. While the channel explodes, it quiets down. You can track it by subtraction. Places where the rain's percussion changes pitch, where ripples meet an obstacle too smooth and too alive to be wood, where the jitter of small fish suddenly consolidates into a single frantic streak and then stops. Every now and then there's a soft clack, conical teeth meeting not to cut but to hold, and the river swallows the sound the way it swallows light, greedily. If this animal had better PR, we would call it the patron saint of bad conditions. A sand-tinted plume surges around a submerged bank and slams into a drift of dead branches. The impact dislodges a swarm of beetles and a smell like a compost heap punched awake. In that tiny chaos, a ray turns on its side and beats the water with its pectoral fin. Once, twice, signalling the panic in a language the river carries instantly. The shadow uncoils. The approach isn't a sprint, it's geometry, angle, countercurrent, minimum wake. A single S-shaped stroke brings a long, narrow skull within arm's length of the ray. If arms were a thing anyone had time to use. The jaws don't snap shut theatrically. They close with a damp, final certainty. Teeth, fitting around cartilage like fingers around a wrist. The branches shiver. Bubbles break. Then the river edits the scene, and there's only rain again. If you could pull the darkness off like a curtain, the set would be packed. Big fish that look like moving walls. Rays dragging combs of teeth through the substrate. Sharks with odd, flattened spines, interested in the same things you're interested in, not dying. Turtles built like manhole covers. Crocodilians of several moods. Even the air above is busy. Pterosaurs skimming on the edge of competence. Wings snatched and folded between gusts. But the curtain stays up, and the rules are feeling, not seeing. Pressure waves, low-frequency sound, the gentle thump of heartbeats transmitted through meat and water. You don't need eyes when the river writes such honest letters to your face. Some nights the current settles into long, slow strings like a giant animal purring. Not tonight. Tonight it is all elbows trying to shove everything downstream quicker than downstream wants to be, and the shadow that hunts here is built for that rude conversation. Dense bones soak up buoyancy, make the body heavier, more planted in the column. A long snout with nostrils offset just enough to breathe while the business end is submerged. A tail that doesn't thrash so much as persuade water to move around it. You could put this body in a clear lake and it would work. You could put it in a tar pit and it would still try. A tree falls into the channel with a rumble and a teeth-on-glass crack as the trunk snaps. The sudden pulse from that disaster sweeps through everything living and dead, a travelling head count. The shadow pauses, lets the river redraw itself, and then slips into the eddy behind the new log like a rumour sliding into a conversation. The crocodilian on the sandbar lifts just enough to show a keel of armoured back and then lowers again, deciding that courage is a land animal's hobby. Underneath it all, the bottom is a slow avalanche of grains migrating, dunes of sand walking patient miles over centuries. Bones lie down there too, teeth the size of your fingers, vertebrae like worry beads, scales like shields, tucked into layers that future storms will cut into and future creatures will wonder at. What we call a fossil bed is just a place where the river practiced hoarding. Tonight's tragedies are items on a layaway. Lightning again, so brief you wonder if the brain invents its own flash to keep from drowning in black. And in that instant the sail is undeniable, a procession of tall spines rising from a back that should look ridiculous and somehow doesn't. It catches no wind, not in any way that matters. It writes a silhouette into water, a threat line. The tail follows, high finned and confident, an oar more than a whip. Then darkness reasserts itself, and the afterimage is all you get. If you listen long enough, you learn the dark has a schedule. The river grows loud and then it rests, like a predator that eats in bursts and sleeps in between. During the lulls, the small things risk movement. A school of pycnodont fish, round as coins, with teeth made for crushing, works the shallows. A juvenile crocodilian, feeling brave in its shoelace skin, noses out from under a root. The shadow waits on the seam where fast water meets slow. Does not need to patrol. The world comes to the seam. The world always comes to the seam. Every so often a clean breath breaks the surface. Nostrils barely clearing the line. A discreet punctuation mark. One that would look almost polite if it weren't attached to so much inevitability. Air in, stale air out, back down. No theatre, no roar. The kind of confidence that doesn't have to announce itself. If you crave spectacle, you won't get it. You'll get outcomes. By morning, if morning arrives clean, if the rain remembers how to stop, the channel will have moved a little, subtracting a bend here, adding a sand tongue there. The banks will be chewed new. The floodplain will wear fresh scars, the kind that make future storms hungry. A scatter of scales will drift among the reeds. A cracked rostrum spine will lodge under a log. A tooth will embed in clay and wait 100 million years for daylight. But right now the river is still black, still talking, still full of professionals reading each other by touch. And somewhere within that moving blackout, the hunter that never needed eyes is parked in the perfect angle, in the perfect silence, listening for the next mistake. It looks like evolution tried to draw a crocodile from memory after a bad dream, and then overcommitted. Start at the face. A long, narrow rostrum that doesn't slice so much as sees, lined with smooth conical teeth. No steak knife serrations, no romantic T-Rex theatrics, just wet iron pegs built to hold something that wriggles. At the very tip, the jaws flare into a rosette, a subtle swelling where the premaxilla make extra space so the front teeth can interlock like fingers around a wrist. When a fish makes the classic, I can still get away if I thrash move. Those teeth don't argue. They apply policy. The nostrils aren't at the business end. They're nudged back, retracted up the snout like someone moved the air intake out of the spray zone. That means the animal can push its face into the water, where all the interesting mistakes happen, and still breathe without doing that embarrassing seal impression. Eyes, small by tyrant standards, and not the star of the show. This is a skull that treats vision like a luxury, and plumbing like destiny. Roll back from the head and the neck carries its long spear with a quiet confidence. No violin curved swan neck, no flared show muscles, just a sturdy, low-slung lever system to aim a mouth at motion. The vertebrae are built for a steady sweep rather than a high explosive whip. It's a sniper platform for a face that reads rivers. There's nothing frantic here. The architecture whispers, "I can wait." Then the torso, deep-chested, barrelish, more boat than bird, with ribs that make a broad cross-section for water to push against without rolling it over. Inside those ribs, the bone itself is heavier than a land sprinter would tolerate. Not just big, dense. The kind of density that says goodbye to buoyancy and hello to control. In clear lakes, animals can count on eyes. In black water, gravity is a steering wheel, and this body grabs it with both hands. You can think of it as ballast you grew yourself. And that sail, a parade of neural spines that march up the back like scaffolding for a billboard. People like to argument club each other about it. Heat exchange as a fat store, display, hydrodynamic stabilizer, cosmic joke. In the river it's a vertical message more than a wing. I'm taller in the water even when I don't move. Maybe it broke up the body signature for prey reading pressure waves, yes. Maybe it said, "Pick me," to potential partners. Maybe it just caught the last light at dusk and made rivals nervous. The river doesn't file paperwork on these things, it merely accommodates. Now the forelimbs, shockingly honest, are not the withered coat hooks most big theropods carried. The shoulders look funded. The arms are short compared to the whole animal, but muscular, with broad attachment sites and an especially conspicuous first claw. A heavy curved talon, like a farmer's tool. On land it could rake, pry, haul. In the shallows and margins it could pin a slippery thing against mud or root. Imagine a fish that almost got away. The claw is what almost was invented for. Back legs, reduced, yes, but not ridiculous. They read like a compromise between two worlds. The femur is robust, but below the knee, the picture gets efficient. Shorter levers, less obsessed with bounding across dunes, more interested in pushing off a substrate you can't always trust. In fast water, long legs become liabilities, more to drag, more to snag. Here, the skeleton has filed them down to what the current will tolerate. On land, that looks awkward. In the river, it looks like the bare minimum required to not argue with physics. The tail is where the animal shows its hand. Not a whiplash cord for counterbalance, not a whip for turning on a dime. It's tall, expanded, a fin made of bone and muscle, each vertebra wearing a high hat so the whole profile becomes a paddle. 1, 2, 3 quiet strokes, and you cross the space between hearing prey and eating it. There's room for tendons to store that elastic energy and return it as a smooth shove. Think crocodile, then cheat with extra surface area. The best part. It barely talks to the surface while it works. No splashy sermon, just execution. The sin, whatever texture it wore, had to do a grim job. Keep the whole frame sleek enough to slip through record water without rattling. Maybe there were osteoderms, bony tiles under the hide. Maybe not. Spinosaur fashion is stingy with direct evidence. But the silhouette promises low fuss. A lot of river hunters go wide and flat. This one goes tall and narrow, a blade set edge-on to the current, the torso's depth buying roll stability while the tail trades width for thrust. It doesn't look like a fast animal, because it isn't, in the sprinting sense. It's a pressure accountant with a quiet motor. Teeth again, because it matters, conical and smooth, means they don't shred meat into confetti. They pierce, hold, and let the river help with the rest. You grab a fish, or, let's be honest, a juvenile crocodilian or a careless lungfish. Then you angle your head so the current does the cutting you didn't evolve serrations for. There's a reason the mouth is long. More tooth to touch more target. More leverage to stop something slippery from negotiating terms. The bite force doesn't need to break bone, it needs to deny escape. That's a different engineering problem, solved here with geometry and patience. Inside the skull, the cavities for nerves and blood lace forward, tiny canals. a mesh of sensitivity that pairs with those conical teeth like a lock with its key. This is where the animal cheats the dark. Press a long muzzle into turbulent water, and the world arrives as texture. The rapid stutter of small prey, the slow thump of something huge rolling over, the arrowed whisper of a fish committing to a direction. The snout is less a face, and more a fingertip that happens to end in a trap. Balance this with the belly full of rock masquerading as bone, and you get the move that makes everything else work. Sink. Not dive like a bird, settle like a verdict. When buoyancy stops arguing, the body anchors in the moving column and little manipulations. Ankle here, hip there, tail or twitch, translate into precise posture rather than a chaotic bob. Swimming is almost rude as a word. This is station keeping, this is holding still in a river that hates stillness. A magic trick that leaves both hands visible and still fools you. The chest cavity by necessity carries the air that lifts and betrays. The solution again is distribution, not denial. Broad ribs, a long torso, a spine that runs like an unhurried highway. Air gets spread out over distance so it can't gather into one big buoyant tantrum. You exhale and become quiet. You inhale and stay boring. Meanwhile, the nostrils that were moved out of the splash zone sip when they must and vanish again, the mouth still down where choices are made. Even the feet, those reduced functional paddles, play their dull part well. On land they would look like embarrassment. In sludge they read like snowshoes. In a sandy channel they push without digging themselves a grave. The claws aren't sabres, they are anchors and hooks, punctuation marks you plant in the world when the world tries to underline you and move on. There's humour in the whole build if you squint. A predator that got bored with open plains, decided weather was more interesting than visibility, and then rewrote its bones to match the joke. Tyrannosaurs got the movie posters. This thing got a blueprint that reads like a dare. Heavier bone so the river can't bully you up. A tail that trades drama for force. A snout designed to handshake with turbulence and not let go. Arms that actually do things, legs downsized like an economy car that keeps beating trucks in traffic. Put it into black water and it becomes a problem you can't see but have to solve. The body resolves all the contradictions. Big but subtle, powerful but quiet, specialised without the awkward label. Move just enough, never more. Feel first, act second, engineer away the things light used to do for you. It's not a fast hunter because the hunt doesn't start at speed. It starts at design. If you were to assemble a kit for predation in a river that habitually turns to soup, you'd lay out the parts on a wet log and accidentally build this. A mouth for grabbing, not chewing. A skull that breathes above the crime scene. A torso that refuses to float when floating would betray it. Limbs that concede to water but won't fail in mud. A tail that remembers paddles are superior to aspirations, and a sail that, whether it calms mates or unsettles rivals, makes the silhouette unforgettable to anything with a memory. The whole frame says one sentence over and over, in a voice the river understands. I do not need to see you to finish this. Start at the tip of the muzzle, because that's where the river meets the brain. The bone there isn't smooth. It's pocked with tiny holes, pinprick windows that look like bad skin under a cruel mirror. Each little opening is a doorway for nerves and blood, a hint that the snout wasn't just a battering ram but a fingertip the size of a canoe. Follow those openings inward and you find a honeycomb of canals, a microtunnel system threading forward from the skull, carrying wires and plumbing to the surface. It's the sort of architecture you build when you want to feel everything the water is whispering and pay for it with absurd sensitivity. Eyes are optional, information is not. Modern crocodilians wear similar dots. Integumentary sensory organs, little dome-like pressure sensors that read the river like braille. They can pick out a single drop falling into still water, locate it, snap at it. Party tricks from a horror party. Our river hunter wears the same clue set etched into bone. We don't get the soft tissue, only the footprints it left behind, the crowd of foramina, the widened channels for nerves, the way the snout flares ever so slightly at the tip to make space for more hardware. If you're building a face to be a cockpit, this is how you wire it. Imagine pushing that long, narrow muzzle into black water. The river writes constantly, vortices shed from a fish's tail, the slow drum of something huge rolling over, the chaotic scribble of panicked fins. Water is a tattletale and pressure waves are its gossip. Specialized mechanoreceptors in the skin translate all that mess into map coordinates, relative direction, distance, speed, without a single photon getting involved. Where a sight hunter sees silhouettes, this thing feels geometry. The difference is not subtle. The nerve in charge, the trigeminal cranial nerve 5, the nerds keeping score, is the big courier here. In animals that live by their face, it's always important. In this one, the bony corridors that protect it read like a VIP passage. Branches run to the upper jaw, the lower jaw along the midline, fanning outward to service that field of microsensors packed into the flesh. You can picture the input storm, a million gentle taps transmitted through river skin to bone, then nerve, then brain. What arrives is not fish. What arrives is a moving set of pressure signatures with timing and amplitude, a sheet of numbers that feels like a living thing. Touch does different work in water than in air. In air, movement dampens fast. In water, even a sulky flick throws a tantrum that travels. Fish write in strual rhythms, tail beats producing regular packets of vorticity, and a patient reader can tell when those beats change from cruising to panic. Our hunter was patient. It could hold very still, dense bones anchoring it in the current, and let the river come to its face. The worst thing you can do in a sensory soup is make your own soup noisier. So it doesn't. It becomes something fixed. The world paints itself on that fixed surface and gives away its secrets. Add in sound and the picture sharpens. Low-frequency sound walks through water like it owns the place, and bone is an obedient sidewalk. Modern crocs can conduct vibration through their jaws to the middle ear, a bone route a shortcut. We don't get to run a living test on our sailback professional, but the engineering is in the same neighbourhood. Big solid lower jaws, a stout hinge, pathways for transmitting energy inward. Even if hearing wasn't crocodile clever, the head was a drum. Hit the water with motion, the drum hums, the brain learns what that hum means. There's another trick in the plumbing. All that surface sensitivity creates a problem. Water is cold, rivers are rude, tissue gets numb. That's why blood is part of the story. The web of canals in the snout wasn't just for nerves. They ferried warmth, oxygen, groceries, for high-maintenance sensors that couldn't go offline without turning dinner into maybe. Think of it as climate control for the face. You keep the river's data stream flowing by paying the heating bill in red, and there's nuance far beyond prey over there. The pressure field around a school of fish isn't just a blob, it's many tiny energy signatures written in parallel. A slow pulse from the big one in the middle, a glittery hiss from the smaller fish on the periphery, a sudden synchronized twist when they all agree to catastrophically change their group mind. A predator that can read that tapestry can choose. The wounded one broadcasts louder and sloppier. The juvenile pulses faster and shorter. The distracted one, busy with its own hunt, loses rhythm for half a second. Half a second is a confession. When it needs to, the hunter cheats even harder. Touch the snout to the bank. Lay it against a root lace or a submerged log. Solid objects become amplifiers, turning the water's vague murmurs into cleaner stories through structure-born vibration. It's like putting your ear to the table during an argument. Suddenly the words have edges. Now add that the nostrils were nudged back from the muzzle tip. breathe with the business end still underwater, and the whole posture becomes obvious. Face down, sensors on, body quiet. A periscope made of nerves. We love to talk about eyes because eyes are photogenic, but eyes in this river are the worst staff member on shift. Light scatters, contrast dies, edges soften, until they may as well not exist. Pressure does the opposite. It sharpens with stillness. The longer the predator waits, the more the mean signal emerges from chaos. If you can afford to wait, and the heavy bones and paddle tail were a trust fund for waiting, the water will eventually describe the thing you want in enough detail for a plan. What does a plan feel like? First, subtraction. Cancel your own noise. No fin flare, no head bob. Then alignment. Rotate that meter-long snout so the pressure gradient steepens, because steeper means closer. There's a geometry to it that would make a math teacher weep. Ears for phase, skin for amplitude, brain for the silly magic trick of turning 1,000 analog inputs into a single decision. Forward 3 body lengths, then bite. The mouth's conical teeth don't have to cut. The sensors have already negotiated you into the place where holding is enough. If the prey is small and fast, there's a surge of white noise jitter in the receptors, a high-frequency scribble as it zigzags. The trick is not to chase the scribble. You kill the zigzag in the head by aiming for where the wavefront says commitment. Fish only get purchase in water when their bodies roll into a side-to-side beat. That beat is predictable a fraction before it's visible. The snout knows. It cheats the future by a heartbeat. If the prey is big, a ray lifting sand in sheets, a lungfish elbowing the mud for air, the river shouts in bass. Low, slow pushes that telegraph mass and effort. Now the plan is different. Approach along a line where your body's bow wave cancels. Ride the negative pressure behind debris. Make yourself the quietest version of your shape. Sensors will tell you when you're in the dead zone. No bright sizzle from your own wake, just the clean thump of someone else's struggle. That's the moment when the jaw glides forward and those wet iron pegs close in a polite, ruinous circle. There's a mean little joke hidden here. The more chaotic the conditions, the more the sensors shine. Rain turns the surface into static, silt turns light into rumour, wind turns the channel into a muscle, and the face becomes a better machine. All that noise blows out visual hunters and panics amateurs. But noise can be filtered. Patterns can be rescued from noise if you've built a skull for it. Rivers reward the boring predator with unfair advantages. We can only guess how the brain looked, but endocasts from kin tell us enough to talk responsibly. The facial nerve system in some long-snouted fish-eaters is overrepresented. The real estate behind the snout given to processing touch and taste that matter when your dinner lives in a moving medium. Maybe smell chimed in, chemical cues from wounds or spawning, but in a flooded world taste is just smell with wet clothes on. The snout didn't care which door the information used, only that it arrived soon enough to matter. And the face worked both ways, input in, output out. The same canals that warmed and fed the sensors were also emergency plumbing for heat dumped during effort. Grab something big, wrestle it, and you have a head full of angry capillaries. The water can steal that heat if you give it good access. Those pinprick windows weren't just antennae housings, they were radiators. Build a face that's good at feeling, and you incidentally build a face that can keep feeling after 10 minutes of rude physics. At the surface, things got interesting. There's a boundary layer at any interface where fluid meets air, a slow, awkward skin where currents shear and stall. Touch your snout to that skin and it talks back differently. Ripples run, reflected waves return, the pressure story changes dialect. Modern crocs exploit that language to track things they can't see on top. Our hunter likely did the same. Breathe exactly enough to stay alive and put the rest of your life into reading the line where two worlds meet. Remember the little clawed hands we keep laughing at? They had a role here too. Touch isn't just a head thing. In root tangles and reed mats, those forelimbs could pin or test, feel whether the thrash under the snout is triumph or a branch pretending to be dinner. The tail, the legs, the chest stabilise. The hands make the final tactile verification. The brain that lives by its face doesn't complain about extra fingers on the truth. The result of all this is a new way to imagine a hunt in darkness. Not dashing, not roaring, not dramatic. It's a conversation between a river and a skull. The skull asks questions with posture, the river answers with pressure, and the senses translate. The jaw is just the period at the end of a very long, very quiet sentence. And when it closes, the story ends not because anyone saw it coming, but because something under the skin knew it far too well to be surprised. Water is a tattletale with a perfect memory for motion. You put anything into it, a fin, a foot, an entire panic, and it writes a signature that spreads outward, whether you meant to announce yourself or not. In clear water, vision is gossip. In black water, physics is testimony under oath. Prey can hide from light. It cannot hide from pressure. Start with the simplest confession. Push water and it pushes back. That push doesn't vanish, it becomes a wavefront, a travelling change in pressure and velocity. Fish do this on purpose. Every tail beat peels off a chain of rotating eddies that trail behind them like footprints, paired swirls spinning in opposite directions, a neat repeating barcode called a vortex street. The faster the fish, the tighter the spacing, the larger the fish, the fatter the swirls. If a mathematician were forced to translate all this into a single smug number, they'd use a Strouhal value, how tail beat frequency, body size and speed lock together around a tidy constant. Translation for the rest of us. The rhythm of a fish's life shows up in the water as a pattern you can read if your face is built like a seismograph. That pattern is loud in the near field, the intimate zone within a handful of body lengths where the water doesn't just carry sound, it moves back and forth in chunks you can physically feel. Beyond that, in the far field, you get classic acoustics, pressure changes racing through water at around 15 football fields per second, informative but anonymous. Something happened. Helpful but vague. The near field is ruder and more useful. It says where, how fast, how big, and if you're patient, how scared. Now imagine you're anchored in that soup, bones intentionally heavy so the current can't boss you around. The trick, the whole religion, is to be still enough that the river's music arrives without your own body adding drum solos. Stillness turns noise into signal. The longer you hold, the more the messy thunder of turbulence shakes out into the repeating cadence of a swimming thing trying to stay alive. In the first seconds, everything is thunder. 10 seconds later, there are rhythms. 30 seconds later, there are decisions. A school goes by and the water becomes a chorus. Dozens of small tails scribbling fast, thin vortices at the edges, slower, meatier ones near the big bodies in the middle. Somewhere within, one fish is offbeat, injured, distracted, or simply unlucky with its timing. You don't see it. You don't have to. Its tail beat slips out of the common rhythm, and the mismatch levers your attention like a voice cracking during a whisper. That's the one you choose, because physics just pointed at it with both hands. Between you and the target is a battlefield of currents. Eddies roll off submerged roots. Sheets of fast water slide over slow, the rain slaps the surface and writes a million tiny lies. You navigate with geometry, move across a flow, and you announce yourself with a bow wave that screams, "Hi, I'm large." Move along a flow, downstream with it, or upstream against it, and your wake subtracts from the background. The quietest path is the one that aligns with the water's own intent. You take it. There's more. Objects cast shadows in moving water. Behind a log or a rock, the flow slows and curls. a low-pressure pocket that hums differently than the main current. Step into that pressure shadow and the river hides you. Your tail, built like a paddle instead of a whip, can sip water without flaring it, each stroke a muted shove. Your body's cross-section, deep rather than wide, resists rolling. Between strokes you go to zero, the water smooths out, the target's weight keeps broadcasting, yours does not. If you could see the math, you'd see your snout turning into an antenna array. Pressure on one side, pressure on the other, tiny differences in timing and amplitude telling you angle and distance, phase here, intensity there. The brain doing what brains do best. Cheating. A fish veers left. Its tailbeat cadence jumps a notch, and the far side of your muzzle feels the change a fraction of a heartbeat before the near side. Not much, just enough. In darkness, just enough is the same as everything. Fish are trapped by their own efficiency. To move forward, they have to push water backward. That push is not negotiable, is the cost of going anywhere, and that cost prints a map. The river gives you its contours like raised ink on a page. You read with your face. It's almost unfair, like hunting footprints that keep refreshing themselves as the animal runs. Eddies don't live forever. Small ones die quickly. A spin eaten by viscosity and hungry mixing of larger flows. Big ones last. That difference is a filter. Ignore the glitter of small things a few meters away. They'll be gone before you can reach them. Hear the steady, patient thump from the big body rolling near the bottom. That's dinner with inertia. Physics triages the options for you because physics is tired of amateurs. Watch how prey betrays itself during panic. Cruising fish swing their tails in a calm repeating S, shedding vortices like clockwork. Panic throws that metronome into chaos. Stutters, double beats, sudden stalls. Each hiccup is a burst of extra pressure, a spiky packet in the flow that has "I regret my choices" written on it. You don't chase the zigzag, you aim for the commitment that follows the zigzag, the moment when a body must push hard to change direction. That hard push is a beacon. You arrive as the push ends. At the instant the prey's muscles have spent their budget. Even rain is data. Raindrops write fast. Tiny pressure pops on the surface. The pattern is broadband, shallow, and very busy. Good news, it mostly lives in a different register than the steady, low-frequency sigh of a swim stroke. Your sensors, tuned by shape, skin, and nerve, treat the storm like static. And where the drops hit hard enough to stir a film of turbulence, you can step beneath, out of the slap, and let the cleaner story underneath resume. When the sky gets loud, the river becomes strangely private. The surface itself is a double agent. At the boundary with air, flow changes personality. It slows to near nothing in an invisible skin called the boundary layer, then tears away into ripples and reflections. Touch that skin and it feeds you gossip from above. Gulls skimming, a lungfish gasping, but it also lets you hide beneath it, breathing through nostrils moved back from the splash, while the working end of your skull stays in the truth. Breathe, read, blink if you want to, but it won't help. People like to imagine predation as speed. It's not. It's timing wearing speed's jacket. In black water, the winner is the animal that waits until the signal-to-noise ratio tilts, and then moves exactly as much as required. No more. One quiet tailstroke to close. A micro-correction to angle the snout into the steepest part of the pressure gradient. A jaw that doesn't slam so much as erase possibilities. That last motion is almost ceremonial. An end to a sentence the river started writing for you. Sometimes the river hands you a cheat code. A ray lifts its wing and peels a sheet of sand off the bottom. That curtain drifts with the current, a rolling wall of fine grains that hums at a known dull pitch. Slip into the lee of that wall and you're masked. The prey's own mess becomes your cloak. Other times a tree falls in and the newborn eddies beat like a heart. Ride the heartbeat's troughs, your wake nests in theirs and goes missing. Of course the river isn't generous. It tries to frame you too, put your tail down too hard, and you stamp a vortex the size of a dinner plate into the flow. The prey feels it, and the chase degrades into slapstick. That's why the tail is tall and the strokes are measured. That's why the bones are heavy and the body is balanced. You're spending posture as currency to buy quiet. Every wiggle you don't make is a signal you don't broadcast. Every second you don't move is a gift to your senses. Sound, real, far-field sound, plays background bass through all of this. Nudging you when something big crashes a sandjet into a new shape or a crocodilian tests its luck against driftwood and loses. You log it. Useful, but not urgent. The urgent things are local, the verticity curling off a body, the sudden thinning of the wake as a fish slips into a higher gear, the way a school's edge pulses in a direction that says, "We're about to turn." Knowing the turn is the same as being there first. If you want a pretty equation, it's this. Stillness plus patience equals information. Information plus a body that doesn't fight the river equals placement. Placement plus a mouth built to hold what cannot be held equals inevitability. You don't outrun anything, you outknow it. The physics of invisible prey isn't about miracles, it's about bookkeeping. The river keeps immaculate records. You simply have the courtesy to read them before you sign at the bottom with your teeth. Water is a drum and everything inside it is a drumstick. Bad news if you're prey. Excellent news if your skull is basically a microphone. Sound in air meanders, sound in water commits crimes. It moves 4 to 5 times faster than what our ears are used to and refuses to die. Especially the low belly-deep notes. The thud of a log collapsing into the channel. The bassy flutter of a giant ray lifting sand like a bedsheet. The slow, gummy groan of the current changing lanes around a bend. High frequencies glitter and fade. The lows roll on like weather. You can close your eyes in that darkness, everyone has, because sight is theatre. The real story is told in pressure and vibration, and it never stops. Picture the head of our river predator as a rigid, tuned shell. In birds and their dinosaur kin, the middle ear is simple and efficient. One slender bone, call it the columella, or if you like the old name, the stapes carrying vibrations from the skull to the inner ear's coiled business, where hair cells translate wiggle into meaning. T-Rex, that famous celebrity of dry land, seems to have favoured the low end of the spectrum. Big heads like big bass. Our swimmer is playing a similar station, but the venue is wetter and meaner. Tympanic hearing, the classic eardrum catching pressure changes, is not at its best underwater. Water doesn't love to shake a membrane built for air. So the skull cheats. It listens by bone, tap the river with motion, and the jaw rumbles. That rumble rides along the lower jaw through the long, airless corridors of bone, past the hinge with its thick quadrate, into the columella, which whispers to the fluid-filled inner ear. In crocodilians, the 2 middle ears are connected by a narrow canal, a pressure bridge that turns the head into a pressure difference receiver, a bright trick for telling left from right when the wavelengths are longer than your ego. Our hunter likely wore a similar architecture, single ossicle ear, interlinked cavities, pathways through which vibration can triangulate. Open water muddies direction, bone can unmuddy it. This is where sound stops being sound in the way we think of it. In water there's pressure, the push-pull that microphones adore, and particle motion, the literal to and fro of the medium itself. Fish specialise in particle motion, reading it with inner ear stones and the lateral line. Our predator did not grow a lateral line. It built the next best thing, a face full of pressure domes. You saw their bony plumbing in the snout, plus a jaw and ear system happy to turn particle motion into skull motion and skull motion into messages. It's not a sonar. It's a translator trained on a violent language. Hear how the river tunes itself across distance. Close by, in the near field, you feel the back and forth of moving water as if someone were tugging on your bones. Farther away, the signal becomes pure pressure, a shove that arrives long after the shove started, stripped of detail but not of warning. A lungfish punctures the surface, a sharp local pop, then a broadband smudge as surface tension breaks and reforms. A crocodilian tests a floating mat, a slow, dangerous whomp that announces displacement and mass. A school of mid-sized fish panics, a smear of overlapping flickers that paradoxically become more organised as they fail together. Your brain, sitting in its armoured box, doesn't just hear something. It sorts bass from thunder, from whisper. It assigns distance by the way the skull flexes, direction by tiny illegal timing differences between left and right, intent by rhythm. Now lay the snout into the weeds and discover a new conspiracy. Structure-born vibration cleans the water's gossip. A root lattice, a half-buried trunk, even the hard skin of the cut bank, each acts like a soundboard. They capture the mess of the river and focus it, stripping away some of the random shimmer. You don't need to put an ear to the door when your whole face is the door. This is why the nostrils were pulled back, air in and out while the business end stays glued to the amplifier. Low frequency advantage is a cruel teacher. Its waves are so long they treat a head like a rounding error. Directionality should be terrible. But connect both ears through a canal and suddenly the whole skull becomes a single pressure difference organ. One side of the head sees a hair more pressure than the other at just the right instant, and the brain, wired to indulge tiny cheats, calls it a direction. Crocodiles do this trick. Birds do a variant in air. Our river hunter most likely ran its own version under the surface, a pressure accountant with 2 ledgers and a taste for discrepancies. Keeps score while the storm throws confetti. Rain detonates on the surface, high frequency, shallow origin snaps but try to drown the important notes. They fail. Those drops spend themselves in the top millimeters. Below that film, the river keeps its deep voice. Your sensors, tuned by shape and habit, tune out the glitter and privilege the hum. Meanwhile, thunder hits the far hills and the channel reacts, not to the sound but to the sudden gust and the new sheet of runoff, a low, massy shift. The skull logs it not as threat but as weather. Knowledge is comfort, comfort is stillness, stillness is better hearing. If you want to see the math play out on a body, watch the tail. Sudden, sharp strokes would throw high-frequency noise into the water, attention-getting and dumb. Instead, patient, low-amplitude pushes that stay under the river's own baseline, the way a whisper hides behind a crowd. The heavy bones help here. They soak up your own vibrations so the inner ear can spend more time on other people's mistakes. Even the big, tall sail along the back, whatever else it was for, adds a kind of inertial dignity. A body with that much keel resists being rattled by small insults, and hearing is the art of not being rattled until it matters. Every prey choice broadcasts a different soundtrack. Rays unroll power slowly, their wing beats are elegant, wide and insistent, great wideband fans waving the flow. Bony fish thrum, shark-like hunters scribble long, steady lines of pressure, a metronome with teeth. Otter-thick lungfish gulp and then shuffle. Their story is stop-start and breathy. A predator with a good ear can triage without moving. Expensive to chase, cheap to intercept, waste of time. Decisions are made before the body says anything at all. And the ear is not alone. Taste leaks into the operation whenever blood or broken skin salts the water. Olfactory receptors don't get top billing here, but the mouth is lined with taste buds who don't care about your aesthetic. Chemical and acoustic blur in the flood. A fin clipped by a tooth upstream becomes both a sound and a flavour downstream. A low, ragged thrash followed by a trace metal tang. The brain stacks the evidence and becomes smug. When the strike finally comes, it is synchronized to the prey's loudest lie. Prey changes direction. It must push hard. One big, sloppy tail beat that rings the water like a bell. That's your beat. The jaw glides forward through darkness, zeroing in on the phase where the wake peaks, but before the fish's muscles can reverse. You're not faster, you're in time. The mouth closes not at random, but at the exact end of the prey's note. Good hearing turns a bite into punctuation. Direction in deep darkness is earned, not granted. The head yawns a few degrees, comparing what the left side and right side report, then tips to where the overall vibration climbs. It's a slow, greedy scan, no dramatic swings, just correction until the steepest gradient lines up with the snout. If you could map the river's acoustic landscape, you'd see the predator perched on a contour line that points directly to food, the way mountaineers follow isobars on a map. Except here the altitude is pressure, and the ridge you're riding is sculpted by a fleeing animal. There are limits. Truly still water plays tricks. Without flow, wakes don't ride far, and the ear must lean on different clues. Tiny movements, breath bubbles, the occasional surface kiss. But in the flood, in the normal state of everything is moving all at once, the ear is king. It was not built to show off, it was built to not be surprised, and then to be the last surprise that mattered. What does all of this feel like from the inside? Imagine a room where the lights are off but the walls move with every footstep, every breath, every shift of weight, and your fingertips are sunk into those walls. Far away, someone opens a door. The pressure in the room sighs. Nearby, a moth flutters, the wallpaper tickles. You wait until the person down the hall stumbles and leans hard against the plaster. That heavy, clumsy push telegraphs through the studs. Now you move. That is hearing in black water. Architectural, tactile, precise. The prettiest irony is that silence gets louder the better you are at listening. The predator's movements become almost monastic. Breathe when the air is least busy. Stroke the tail when the river's own pulse can hide it. Freeze when the world is offering information for free. Vibration and sound are not just cues, they are the budget. Spend nothing until the moment you can buy everything. Then spend once. Smell is just memory dissolved in water. You don't inhale it here, you wear it. The river's a lab experiment that never ends. Amino acids, bile salts, blood iron shaved thin, the reek of rot braided with the bright coppery snap of something newly broken. Air is polite. It parcels odours into neat little clouds you can sniff like a connoisseur. Water is a hoarder. It takes every chemical confession and drags it downstream, smearing it into ribbons that tangle, knot, and thin, until the whole channel is a moving biography of who got hurt and where. Start with the simple truth. Nostrils aren't much use once you drown them. In crocodilians, a palatal valve slams shut when they submerge, turning the throat into a sealed chamber so the lungs don't fill with river. The price of that clever trick is obvious. Underwater sniffing isn't a thing. Our river hunter wore its nostrils high and back from the snout tip, a design that says breathe while your face is busy, not pipe water through your nose like a shark and call it perfume. So how do you smell when the world is a drink? You cheat, you taste. Taste buds don't care about your pride. They sit in the mouth and throat, dull little chemists waiting for molecules to hit. Open that long jaw a whisper, let water creep in along the teeth and your whole palate becomes a testing strip. Blood is allowed flavour. Iron and protein and 1,000 small breakdown products that advertise injury. Fish broadcast subtler signals when they panic or breed. Some release alarm cues into the water when their skin is damaged, a chemical scream that tells the school to get their affairs in order. Even if our Cretaceous cast didn't invent that trick yet, injury always leaks chemistry. The river predator learns the difference between old tragedy and fresh mistake the way you learn to tell coffee from smoke in the next room. But water doesn't deliver these messages kindly. In a river like this, odour doesn't drift in tranquil gradients. It tears into filaments, patchy, intermittent streamers braided by turbulence. One mouthful is rich with information, the next is blank. The third tastes like mud and humility. That's fine. The animal's made for intermittent truth. Hold position, dense bones anchoring the body, tail correcting with quiet skulls, and run a program as old as cell sample, weight sample again. If the taste sharpens, you're pointed right. If it fades, you adjust a few degrees and let the current test your faith. You don't chase the source in a straight line. You cast across the plume like a weaver. Left, right, longer right, looking for the edge where the flavour snaps from maybe to there. Every chemical has personality. Fresh blood is bright and metallic. It spikes and then softens as the river chews it. Wound slime is fatty, bitter, and tells the truth about stress hormones. It's messy but useful. Bile throws green lightning through the taste. Nasty, distinctive, and often tied to deep injury or opened guts. A spawn slick is a different story. Protein sweetness. A low, rich background that says everyone is here and distracted. Rot sings in a choir of sulfides and amines, the kind of smell that makes air breathers gag. In the water, it's simply a map to free meat, or to a trap if someone else drew it first. The predator knows the difference because the river taught it with consequences. You follow rot when the current is quiet and your senses say the big boys are elsewhere. You follow bright blood whenever physics smiles. There's style in how the head handles this flood. The long snout, already a fingertip for pressure, doubles as a ladle. Bring in just enough water to wash the palate, and then press the jaws closed again, not to bite, but to hold the sample against taste buds and the soft tissues of the throat. Slide it back, test it high, test it low, spit the rest. You're not trying to drink your way to an answer. You're trying to keep the answer in your mouth long enough for the nerves to write it down, under the skin. The same plumbing that feeds those pressure receptors also ferries warm blood to the palate, so the chemistry stays alive and sensitive. Cold sensors go dumb. Warm ones gossip. At the surface, smell gets back its lungs. Nostrils high, a discreet breath, and at the topmost air carries a different bulletin board. The musk of shoreline nests, the sour of dead things turned up by the flood, the mammal-like breath of some small fuzzy mistake tugging at reeds. Airborne scent won't guide you underwater to a strike. That would be magic. But it sets the agenda. Think of it as the meeting invitation. The actual meeting happens in the mouth once the face goes down again. Sometimes the river writes 2 stories at once. A lungfish punches through for air, leaves a bubble trail that whispers across the skull, and a taste ribbon that says old mud and recent panic. You track the ribbon because the bubbles lie. They move up, not forward, and wind is rude. The chemistry drifts with the current's true mood. You angle into it, sampling every few body lengths. The flavour thickens. Pressure picks up a soft, slow thrash from the bottom. Hearing adds the gummy bass line of a body pushing silt. 3 senses vote yes and 1 abstains. You attend the meeting. Not every plume is worth the travel. Rotten carrion is a loudmouth with nothing to teach you about timing. It pulls in sharks, croc cousins, everything with teeth, and then the current turns the feeding ground into a blind boxing match. Sometimes that's what you want. A scrum where a silent entry earns you a clean mouthful and a clean exit. Other nights you let it go because the chemistry has that flat, sour echo of picked over. Freshness is a shape as much as a flavour. Sharp rise, rounded fall, with a little jag where the wound reopened. Old food is a flat line and a risk. You can use chemistry to set traps. Sit on the downstream edge of a riffle where blood will tatter into strips. Prey moving with the current has to cross the filaments you're guarding. Each fish that slips through adds a data point. A flash of taste, a micro jitter of pressure, a faint specific hiss in the ear when fins panic against gravel. It's not ambush, it's customer service. You let the river bring them because the river always does. Your only job is to be there when it cashiers them. Into pieces of information too tempting to ignore, even the mouth's geometry plays along. Conical teeth interlock like a crate, creating little alleys where water lingers a heartbeat longer before you press it back out between the bars. More time on the palate, more certainty in the brain. If a raised slime coats the front row, that mucus is a sticky receipt that keeps paying. If you clip a fish and miss the hold, you still get the taste of its skin in a smear across enamel. A line item that says turn 10 degrees and try again. There's a low comedy to how fish betray themselves chemically. Stress burps molecules they'd prefer to keep private. Reproductive events smear protein into the flow like a buffet sign. Even scales, when damaged, release the molecular equivalent of static you can't quite ignore. The predator's mouth doesn't overthink it. It collects the gossip, matches it to the water's motion, and assigns it a likelihood. Dying soon. Distracted now, Not worth the tail stroke. On rare windless nights when the flood rests and the current loafs, the odour landscape becomes a slow mural instead of a shredded banner. That's when you can draw lines backward. A faint iron thread, thin as a rumour, runs along the bank. You slide upstream, tasting at intervals like a surveyor planting flags. The thread fattens where a sandbar bends the flow, thins where a side channel steals it, fattens again near the roots of a drowned tree. And then you find it. A fish, wedged and bleeding under the branches, half dead from its own bad arithmetic. No drama, just arithmetic answered. The jokes about electroreception can stay with the sharks. This is a chemical practice built on patience, not superpowers. Your skull feels the water, your ears pass the low notes, your palate grades the flavour. If smell in air is a sharp nose pointed like an arrow, smell in watered is a long conversation with your mouth half open, letting the world flow through while your brain underlines anything it recognises. And when you finally bite, chemistry doesn't stop, it spikes. The first rush of fresh blood is a confirmation signal that shoots through the palate and lights up the oldest parts of the brain, the parts that sign checks without reading them. Pressure says you've got hold. Hearing says the thrash is decaying. Taste says this is new, hot, and yours. You release the water, clamp harder, and the river politely updates its records to reflect the change you just wrote into it. The best killers don't shout, they edit. Watch the tail. No, really, if the river would let you watch anything, it would be Tui. It rises out of the hips like a decision and then becomes architecture. Vertebrae wearing tall squared-off hats, each spine braced with tendons, each gap packed with muscle that cares about one thing, moving water without ever confessing to it. Most theropods carry tails like counterweights, balancing their vanity projects up front. This one built a fin. Function over drama, and the drama takes care of itself. Lay a finger in your mind along those towering neural spines. They're not there for decoration, they're scaffolding. Muscle sheets anchor high and broad, giving the tail a deep cross-section so every lateral twitch has leverage. Below the hemal arches, little bony keels guard arteries and give more real estate for attachment. Between vertebrae, interlocking facets limit stupid bending and allow clever bending, the kind that passes a wave cleanly down the length without wasting motion where it doesn't help. That's the choreography. Energy starts near the hips and ripples outward. amplitude growing by design until the tip writes cursive in the water and the body goes somewhere without looking like it tried. The profile is wrong for speed in the sprinting sense. Bless the tuna, this is not that party. The fins here are meat and bone, not carbon fibre. The aspect ratio is built for authority at low to moderate velocity, for thrust that feels inevitable rather than explosive. Think barge tug-over speedboat. The river has rules about Reynolds numbers and coherent wakes. This tail studies for the exam and then refuses to make obvious mistakes. One stroke, maybe two, and the animal crosses a body length with the same noise you'd make shifting in your sleep. Stealth isn't an attitude, it's hydraulics. Surface splash is a tax you pay when you put energy where the air can find it. So the tail stays deep, paddling in the column rather than slapping at the ceiling. The high spines give it depth to push against. The broad fin face grabs a huge handful of water each cycle and shoves it backward with minimal drama upward. If there's a ripple at the top, it's the river pretending nothing happened. In the dark, the tail composes sentences the prey can't read. The stroke is a patient S, lateral undulation tuned to a narrow Struhal window where thrust per effort peaks. Too slow and you waste time, too fast and you advertise. Here it's cadence over spectacle, amplitude trimmed to stay under the background noise. The current itself becomes cover. Slip your wave into the river's own wave and your wake subtracts rather than adds. It's plight engineering with implied consequences. Muscle doesn't like working alone. Long tendons run the length like guy wires, storing elastic energy during each bend and paying it back on the return. Elastic recoil, nature's way of laundering effort. While red muscle fibres handle the steady hum of station keeping, white fibres lurk, waiting for that single rude burst. The tail obliges with a short clipped acceleration, just enough to cancel the last half metre between almost and yours. Then the red fibres take the wheel again, low-key and smug, and the river forgets anything ever happened. Under the skin, flow obeys a math the tail seems to know by feel. When it swings left, it peels a fat, coherent vortex to the right. Swing right, shed left. A ladder of paired swirls stacks behind the predator, tight and tidy, each rung translating into thrust. The trick is not to overdo the twist at the base. Too much yaw up front and the whole torso becomes a billboard. Here the wave travels, hips modest, mid-tail purposeful, tip emphatic. You get thrust without broadcasting your CV. This is not a rudder and prop arrangement, it's both together with a dash of brake. Need to pivot around a half-fallen log? Put a quick high-amplitude flick into the last third of the tail, and you're through the gap before the eddy finishes, realizing it was fooled. Need to stop without a flourish? Reverse the phase and let the fin dig into the flow. The river eats your momentum and smiles, because it always wanted it anyway. The body doesn't bob, the bone ballast up front keeps that sin in check, so the tail's corrections don't echo into embarrassing head wobbles that tell prey you're new here. People argue about the back sail. Meanwhile, the tail keeps paying rent. In the shallows, a single lazy scull slides the body sideways like a ghost deciding to sit somewhere else. In the Thorweg, the deep, fast vein, longer strokes line up with the current grain, so wake and river rhyme. In weed beds, the tail's tall profile lets it whisper over stems that would snag a narrower build. You know that annoying friend who parallel parks in one motion while you're still calculating angles? Be the tail. When the river throws chaos, storm surge, tree fall, small landslide, the tail tucks into negative pressure pockets like it was born there. It was. Behind a log, flow reverses and thins. The fin talks once, rides the suction, and the animal arrives at the log's far side already pointed the right way. Not a splash, not a tremor above the rain. If you want fireworks, go to the volcano. The river has professionals on tonight. How does it feel to drive with that kind of control? Imagine your spine ending in a steering wheel that can also be a throttle and a handbrake. Micro corrections, 2 degrees of extra bend, a little damping at the tip, kink the wave just enough to drift the body a half-metre left while still moving forward. Macro corrections, shortening the wavelength, pushing a bit harder, at mid-tail, bump speed without changing how loud you are. The head stays level because the tail is doing its job. The snout keeps reading pressure because the tail isn't writing graffiti all over the flow. Energy economy is survival, and the tail is the accountant. It spends in 3 currencies: distance, angle, and time. Distance is obvious. Angle is everything. Put your thrust vector through the praise escape vector and you don't need speed, you need geometry. Time is when the strike happens, which the rest of the body decides with ears, face and palate. The tail just places the comma where the sentence requires it. Even the bones keep secrets that make the whole trick possible. The centra, the vertebral bodies, are spool-shaped, giving space for discs that act like compliant hinges. Not jellyfish soft, not doorstop stiff. Springy. That compliance spreads stress over many joints so one rude push doesn't blow a gasket. Chevrons below act as stiffeners and pipe guards, sure, but they also deepen the trailing edge so the lower half of the fin bites water with as much conviction as the upper. Symmetry where it matters, asymmetry where it helps. The tip often flares a hair wider, dragging a bigger wing through the flow to harvest that last chunk of thrust. Put this tail against a crocodile's and the difference is a personality test. The croc powers from a wedge with a thick base and a narrow top, a powerful paddle that excels in ambush bursts and surface lunges. Our river specialist built a taller, more even blade, better at mid-column, better at keeping noise underwater and momentum continuous. It sacrifices drama at the surface for authority below it. That's not a compromise, it's a choice. Watch it stalk in the seam where fast water peels off a sandbar. The tail hardly moves. When it does, it moves everywhere just a little. The wave shallow, the tip signing the tiniest signature in a book the prey can't read. Then a decision, one clean pulse, and the world jumps forward. The conical teeth don't need the tail to stick around for applause. The job is already done. The fin falls back into its idle hum, bleeding momentum into the channel like a king tipping spare coins to the street. If you're looking for failure modes, they're instructive. Overstroke in debris, and you stamp a telltale into the water, a big disc-shaped vortex that screams large, dumb, and cluss. Lift too much and the dorsal edge kisses air. The splash writes your name in the surface film. The morphology is an argument against those errors. Depth keeps the blade buried, mass keeps the base honest. Muscle layout rewards smooth waves over frantic kicks. Even panic is shaped into competence by the tail's geometry. It won't let you flail, it will let you leave. There is a quiet cruelty to the whole design. By the time a fish feels the pressure ramp of approach, the tail has already turned that feeling into a location. By the time it commits to a last-ditch turn, the tail has already the animal into the turn's endpoint. By the time bubbles show where something happened, the tail has erased the scene. You don't see pursuit. You see corrections. You don't hear a chase. You hear the moment after. And in the rare crystalline lull, rain pausing, current evening out, the tail performs its last magic trick. Stillness. It locks the wave out entirely, a long, straight blade in the water, doing nothing so perfectly that the river forgets to charge it rent. That buys the head all the time it needs to listen. When the next mistake arrives, the tail spends what it saved. One motion, no splash. The ledger balances in red. First, nothing. Not the theatrical kind of nothing where you can tell something is coiling for effect. Real nothing. A body the size of a small car dissolves into the seam, where fast water soars past slow, becomes a line in someone else's paragraph. Dense bone lets it sink until weight and current sign a truce. The tail stiffens into a quiet blade. The chest deflates just enough to stop arguing with buoyancy. Nostrils sip where rain prints its Morse code. The face stays down in the truth. Stillness isn't laziness here, it's data acquisition. The river is loud, but prediction takes silence, and silence takes discipline. The scene is a mess worth loving. A sandbar kicking the flow sideways, a drowned tree laying a shadow pocket of low pressure, a carpet of reeds combining the surface into herringbone ripples. Every actor writes turbulence. The predator edits itself out. Micro-corrections happen where no one can see them, a degree of roll to cancel the eddy tugging at the left flank, a whisper from the tail to keep the snout aimed through the steepest part of the pressure gradient. You could stand above with God's flashlight and still miss the move. The point is to be a subtraction in a room full of additions. Wait long enough and the chaos turns readable. Pressure at the snout stops being thunder and becomes rhythm. A school of mid-sizers hustles across the channel, their wake stacking into a shimmering rope of pulses that feels like a purr against bone. A lungfish under the bank shuffles its life around, thump, pause, thump, a metronome with the emphysema. Something bigger, ray likely, lifts sand in sheets, whomp, glide, whomp. The sensors in the skin send up their little telegrams. The ears, listening by bone as much as by drum, add direction to flavour. Taste joins, late and smug, a thin ribbon of iron where iron shouldn't be. Stillness pays off with a short list. Now the lock. You don't pick targets by size alone, you pick them by error. Watch the school's rhythm for the one that slips, the tailbeat that stutters, the fish that overcorrects, the kid marching out of steps. Phew, that's a vector with feelings. The face turns without seeming to turn, a degree at a time, until the strongest pressure slope sits dead centre. The river says, closer. The nostrils dip, shut, and the palate gets a sample. Fresher blood than a simple scrape, a rounded spike that says, wound opened in the last minute. Chemistry confirms what physics whispered. File away the lungfish. The ray can wait. This fast-moving rumour is the best bet. The lock doesn't mean motion yet. It means mapping. Obstacles are assets if you aim properly. A tangle of branches throws a wake shadow, a cone of calmer water that masks approach. A lump of collapsed bank sets up a recirculating eddy, a little treadmill for anything dumb enough to drift into it. The predator angles to ride those features, not fight them. Keep the head in the seam where the signal is sharpest. Keep the hips in the shadow where your own noise dies. Breathe when rain hammers, move when thunder does. Hide your footsteps under louder footsteps. It's petty, it's perfect. The target commits to a turn, you feel it before you could ever see it. Tailbeat frequency jumps, wake spacing tightens, a packet of extra pressure bulges off axis as the fish braces against water to change its mind. That bulge is the invitation. You don't chase the fish, you move to where the physics insists the fish must be, when its muscles finish paying the bill for that turn. 2 quiet strokes. The first one is almost administrative, pulling the mass through the branch shadow without dislodging a single twig. The second is the whole thesis, short, deliberate, with more push at mid-tail than at the tip so the body slides rather than swings. Head stays level. Sensors don't blink. Burst isn't speed for the sake of pride, it's speed with a budget and a deadline. The jaws do not slam like a guillotine because water hates showboating. They glide forward and narrow the world, conical teeth into a lock. The rosette at the snout's tip, that slight flare where the front teeth can meet like a hand forming a circle, finds exactly where flesh will be when the turn ends. Bite force doesn't need to break bone, it needs to deny negotiation. The clamp happens in a downbeat of the prey's life, where the tail must switch from pushing left to pushing right. Muscles are empty for a blink, the circle closes during that blink. Thrash is inevitable, noise is optional. The predator angles the head with the current so the river itself pulls prey deeper into the mouth instead of away from it. That clever little change does two things. It keeps the teeth seated like wet nails in a plank, and it directs the prey's panic into a spin instead of a pull. Spins waste energy, pulls escape. The body does not engage in the dumb wrestling match the prey begs for. It lets hydrodynamics perform a magic trick, convert linear fight into rotational exhaustion. Meanwhile, the forelimbs, those surprisingly funded little arms, come off the hull just enough to brace against root or reed, pinning the package without fanfare if the margins are close. Reset position if you must. A short reverse phase flick from the tail bleeds speed in an instant, dropping predator and prize behind a log where the flow is a shy trickle. There, in the whisper space, the mouth loosens half a tooth's width and rebites farther back like a climber easing fingers into a better crack. No chewing, no sawing, just an upgrade. If the prey is a ray or a juvenile croc with armour and opinions, press it into the bottom where the sand piles up and flow falters. The river resents stains and removes them for you, pushing silt into the gills, into the nostrils, small ugly advantages that add up to certainty. Abort sequences exist because professionals aren't romantics. If the lock starts to waver, if the pressure picture smears, if a larger crocodilian announces itself with that slow cartel boss whomp, drop the target. It's not pride, it's policy. A single lateral snap of the tail takes you sideways into a different seam and the river eats the evidence. 3 heartbeats later, you're back to stillness. Senses open, ego trimmed. Hunger is a long game, you don't die for a snack. Run it again, with different music. The ray first. It writes bass lines through sand. Whomp lift, whomp lift. The lock happens on rhythm. Count 3 wing beats, move on the offbeat while the ray's own wake carves a tunnel of low pressure behind it. You enter the tunnel like you belong. 1 bite at the trailing edge, where cartilage thins. Hold long enough to ruin the wing's geometry, and the ray's elegant flight becomes a drunken drift. The burst is almost polite, more correction than attack, and then it's over. No applause, just silt resettling. Now the lungfish. It reveals itself by cheating, breathing air in a river that doesn't respect lungs. The surface pop is bright and close. The real lock forms below, where the body bulldozes mud into ripples. Taste adds a smear of old swampy pantry. The predator slides under the breath sight and waits, still as a rumour. The next gasp will be within a body length because lungfish are obsessive. When it comes, the burst is vertical rather than horizontal. A quick lift from the tail, a gentle, horrible corkscrew, and the conical teeth close around the soft, spiralling cylinder. Air bubbles climb like pearls and vanish. The river erases the accident. Energy math stays ugly and honest throughout. Stillness banks energy because red muscle fibers aren't burning much. The lock spends tiny coins, micro movements, fraction degree turns. The burst is 1 note on a drum paid for by white fibers that will sulk if you ask them to do it again immediately. That's fine. The point of the 3 moves is that you don't have to. You hit once in time, and then you're done or you're gone. Chase is for amateurs and the clear-eyed. Sometimes the river gifts you a 4th beat you didn't earn. Cover from above. Rain crescendos. Wind bulldozes small waves into the bank. The predator times its burst to the moment the surface hisses loudest. The prey's lateral line and inner ear, its own versions of truth detectors, drown in static at the exact instant the teeth matter. The animal is not invisible. It is merely indistinguishable from weather, which is better. Handling is a quiet art that follows the bite. The head turns downstream, never up, so the current pushes prey into the mouth, not away. If the fish's spines are rude, rotate the package until the barbs point backward, then advance it with little tongue presses like a conveyor belt under velvet. If a crocodilian cousin thrashes nearby, lift the head a finger's width above the surface as you reposition. That tiny elevation is a signal that reads the same across 100 million years, not your business. Then back down, because theatre invites witnesses, and witnesses invite complications. The pattern scales and flexes with mood and hazard. In shallow riffles, stillness is half body buried in silt, just eyes and nostrils and a ribbon of snout talking to the flow. The lock is almost tactile there, pressure and taste braided so tight they feel like one sense. The burst is a single sideways shove that turns the riffle into a wall and the prey into an answer. In deep runs, stillness is a hanging hover. The lock is pure acoustics across meters. The burst is two strokes that unspool like a measured threat. And always it cycles, nothing, decision, punctuation. Arrange the world so it tells you the truth. Choose the mistake physics can't unsay. Spend one clean motion to make the scene irreversible, then be nothing again. The river notices hunters who love drama. It forgets the ones who are good at this. The dark isn't empty, it's crowded and hungry, and more than one mouth owns a deed to it. Along the bank, the logs with eyes hold their scriptures close. Narrow-snouted crocodilians parked in the pressure shadows, each one a priest of patience with a jaw full of commandments. They run the shallows like toll booths. You move, you pay. Their faces glitter with the same pinprick sensoria our river specialist wears, and the rules are similar. Don't talk with waves. Read what everyone else is shouting. They're not huge, not always, but they scale like knives do. A small one ruins you the same as a big one if you meet it at the wrong angle. When the water is low and the current is lazy, they set up checkpoints at every useful bend, and you suddenly learn that corridor is just a polite word for ambush zone. Sometimes there's etiquette. A heavy body slides past a crocodilian with the confidence of a local. The croc lifts, shows a strip of armoured back, then sinks, deciding the surcharge isn't worth the argument. Sometimes there isn't. A kill thrashes in the dark and the water becomes votes. Pressure signatures piling onto the same location, all the professionals arriving with their invoices. The first bite is never the last. The crocodilians prefer the wrestle. Grab, twist, let the current help you write a spiral into bone. Our specialist refuses the spiral angles with the flow and converts the same physics into a straight line that ends in silence. Two religions, one river, disagreement settled by timing. Step back from the edge and the land has its own parliament of teeth, where the floodplain firms up under cones of conifer shade. Something larger than patience prowls, long-shanked, meat-hooked, a land tyrant with knives where our fisher wears pegs. It is not built for black water, but black water spills meat onto banks and beaches, and that's good enough. When carcasses lodge in the reed beds, the big walker writes its claim with steps you feel through your ribs. Sight is its gospel, open ground is its pulpit. In the storm it's a tourist blinking irritated, more dangerous where the mud gives it a runway. The river tolerates it like weather, relevant but briefly. Let the flood rise one more span and the tyrant's sermon stops at the shoreline while the sermon under the surface continues, patient and rude. Above, the night sketches silhouettes that shouldn't be real. Long wings, toothy beaks, legs like stilts testing the margin between water and land. Pterosaurs, some skimming, some stalking, the big ones stepping like murderous cranes, work the river's skin. In the lull between gusts, one of them threads the darkness, tips a wing into an eddy it can't see and somehow doesn't fall. The small ones stab at surface fish and fly on. The tall Ajdahid nightmares take their fees from stranded juveniles and the freshly dead. They are rivals the way shadows are rivals, opportunists who vanish when the wind remembers its job. When the water throws a fit, they tuck and lift. And the river's business returns to the ones who never left. Out in the channel, the competitors wear scales, not feathers. Coelacanth bulk, The living fossils that already looked like antiques back then lurch along the bottom with a dignity that reads as boredom until a mouth opens like a trapdoor and a half-asleep fish is no longer in the meeting. Lungfish crank themselves through the mud like slow drills, gulping air every mistake or two, their own worst witnesses. Rays erase sand and redraw it, wing beats shedding the kind of bass you feel even if you'd rather not. Sharks visit when marine water sneaks inland, low triangular rumours that circle the deeper runs like auditors, happy to balance books with anything that bleeds. They are less common here than in the open shallows of a true coast, but flood seasons loosen borders. When the river remembers it's part of a sea, teeth from elsewhere arrive. Sawfish are not rumours. They're opinions with handles. A slice through a school sends pressure telegrams across half the channel, the rostrum's teeth combing fate into the water. Even our specialist gives them room, because while you can read a sawfish easily, the wake is big and honest, the returns policy is ugly. Wrong angle, wrong moment, and the bill you bite bites back. The calculus adjusts, pick the ray's soft trailing edge, not the mouthful of shrapnel. Take the distracted fish at the seam, not the one wearing knives on its face. Everyone here has a job, not every job is yours. At Carcasses, the guild assembles. Drift a dead turtle into a backwater, and the order of service looks accidental until you've watched it a dozen times. First the noses and the ears, the underwater ones, arrive. Crocodilians sliding in like bad ideas, the sailback specialist anchoring, cleverly where current turns outrage into buffet. Then the blades. Small sharks if the tide has fingers in the river, sawfish if someone makes the mistake of thrashing at the wrong angle and looks like a net that needs cutting. On the bank, a long-legged theropod tests the mud, thinks about glory and settles for tearing something loose when the tail thrashers aren't looking. Pterosaurs fence with beaks over scraps. One gets a mouthful of rubbery intestine, flutters sideways and loses it to physics. Night scavenging is slapstick with consequences. None of this says peace. Competition here is a long-term contract enforced by weather. When the rains punch the highlands and the channels swell, life tears through the system in bright, stupid abundance. Fish push upstream to breed and the river throws confetti made of protein. There's enough for every set of teeth that knows how to hold still without drowning. The dark feels generous. Then the season turns miserly. Side channels pinch off into kettles, their own hot, oxygen-lousy hells, and 1,000 guild mistakes huddle and wait to be audited. That's when the crocodilians lock down pools like landlords, and our specialist patrols the seams between them, testing for gaps, stealing seconds and fish where it can. Mid-channel expertise becomes an edge again. The deep runs stay wet the longest. Eyes go hollow. Patience grows fangs. The rivals are not only other mouths. The river itself is the biggest competitor, and it moonlights as an assassin. A treefall changes the flow overnight and ruins the old ambush. A bank collapses and buries a hunting ground in a single sigh. Parasites ride in on floods, drill into gills and guts, collect rent for simply being small. Leeches bloom. Insects arrive at dusk to write their own script. Flies drum at the eyes. Mosquitoes go mining along the jaw hinge. A chorus of winged petty thefts that wear on anything with blood. Fatigue is a predator that doesn't need teeth. Sleep wrong and a crocodilian will write the ending for you. Sleep well and the current steals the ground out from under your dreams anyway. Inside the guild, there are arguments that never end. A crocodilian launches a death roll into a logjam and uncorks the whole structure. Everyone eats, and someone loses a limb. A shark misreads distance and learns about timber. A pterosaur overreaches and becomes a lesson. Our specialist picks its fights not because it's kind, but because it cannot afford to be popular. Bite a big croc and win, and you inherit a new schedule. You'll never be alone again at dinner. Bite a small croc and someone larger will come to the review. better to let their spirals write their own disasters while you stand in the seam where their debris comes to you pre-chewed. There are rivals wearing the same sail. Territory isn't a fence, it's a fog bank with edges that move. When two of the same kind catch each other on the wrong side of a good seam, the river gets a new performance. They don't trumpet like the land tyrants, they posture in hydraulics. A slow rising arch of the back turning the sail into a rumour of size. A deliberate side slip that lets the pressure field of one wash across the face of the other. Read me and know what you're arguing with. Jaw gape, show the peg work without using it. Tail feint, one half stroke that says, imagine if I didn't stop. Most of these end with someone leaving sideways, dignity intact. Some end with tooth scratches along the spine and a piece of sail missing. A ragged banner that will tell a longer story to anyone who can read scar tissue. A few end with silence and a new lesson in the fossil record about how expensive pride is. Floodplain politics leak into the water too. Egg thieves and small carnivores, long-bodied, low-slung, clever, work the reed beds and treat the river like a ditch they'd rather not engage. But the ditch moves, and sometimes so do they. One misstep, one slick route, and a furred shape becomes an entry in someone else's ledger. The splash is small, the conclusion sudden. Above, scavengers recalculate. Below, the professional who didn't move at all just became the story's editor again. On rare bright days when the water clears just enough for sight to matter, a different hierarchy shows. The land tyrant struts the margin, and anything sensible honours that announcement. Crocodilians sink deeper and hold their sermons in hushed tones. Our specialist does something almost insulting. It hunts the same way it did in the dark. Vision becomes extra, not a crutch. The rival's suddenly dependent on a sense that can be taken away by one storm. Remember, which creed lasts? The river keeps score in silt and bone. If you want to measure status here, don't look for thrones. Listen for interruptions. Who can stop eating to keep the seam? Who keeps their back turned to a crocodile? Boy, because the angle is honest and the pressure says the croc is bored. Who rewrote a burst when a sawfish writes a bad idea into the water? Who refuses a carcass because the chemistry says police are coming and lives to find a better one? Rank is made out of those choices, out of 1,000 quiet refusals to audition for death. Night after night, storm after storm, the same rivals punch their clocks, and the river keeps hiring. But the guild doesn't end, it rotates. The crocodilians age into furniture. Pterosaurs come and go with wind and season. Sharks visit like tax collectors. The land tyrants blunder at dusk and dawn, rich when the bank is generous, irrelevant when it isn't. Through all of it, a long-nosed, heavy-boned editor swims the seam and turns other people's noise into food. The dark is not neutral, it takes sides, always for whoever reads it better. Tonight, that's the one with the paddle for a tail and the patience to make physics pick favourites. Deep time hoards its secrets like a dragon, and when we ask polite questions, it answers with smoke. Start with the original evidence, the bones that should have settled everything. The first good skeleton of this animal was described from Egypt a century ago, a river monster sketched out in careful plates, then stacked in a museum in Munich. It survived sandstorms, politics and professional arguments, and then didn't survive a night of bombs. A building turned into orange heat, the bones turned into grit, and with them went a clean baseline for what this thing looked like from neck to hips. We've been reverse engineering a rumour ever since. What we get now comes mostly from a different stage, the Moroccan Kem and its relatives, a wash of sediments laid down by angry rivers that did not believe in filing systems. Picture a bulldozer made of water moving for thousands of years. It scours, reworks, mixes, dumps. In that slurry of time, the bones of the fast, the slow, the dead, and the unlucky shake hands long after their owners stop doing anything at all. You find a jaw here, a vertebra there, and a tail section 20 meters away covered in iron lipstick. None of them sign their names. Put them together and you're building a jigsaw where the sky pieces might belong to another puzzle, and the box art burned down in 1944. Taphonomy, the science of what happens to a body after life quits, is supposed to help and does right up until it doesn't. River transport rounds edges, breaks articular surfaces, peels away light, intricate anatomy, and leaves the stout stuff. Scavengers take the good bits you wanted for exact answers and keep the rest. Diagenesis, the chemical magic that turns bone into stone, bloats, stains, and sometimes smears microscopic structure until it tells a different story. We step in later with CT scanners and microdrills and pretend we can subtract the vandalism cleanly. The numbers we pull out are educated, not holy. Meanwhile, the marketplace keeps things lively. Many bones don't come out of the ground with field notes. They come out wrapped in newspapers and hope, sold by weight and charisma. You can radiograph, you can thin section, you can say provenance with a moral sigh, but when a rib arrives divorced from its geology, the part of your argument that says this shape means this behaviour gets a little shakier. The animal itself isn't lying to you, the supply chain is. Now weigh what we know against what we want to know. We have skull bits that whisper fish eater, long rostrum, conical teeth, neurovascular canals like a net cast for sensation. We have torso pieces that look barrel deep and heavy. We have limb bones that make land speed look like a rumor someone started for fun. And we have that tail, tall, fin-like, a blade rather than a whip, which reprogrammed the way even the stubborn had to imagine this thing moving. But connect the dots and you'll find that most lines you draw span gaps. How long were the legs, exactly? Depends on which individual you scaled from, how you corrected for age, what you assume about the hip you don't have. Where exactly did the centre of mass sit once you add lungs and meat and the sin of skin? Pick your model, pick your answer. Even the bone's weight, the densification that lets a body reject buoyancy and sink like a decision, looks different depending on which slice you take. Some samples scream osteosclerosis, the kind of infilling that specialises a hunter for the water column. Others hedge, dense here, airy there. Was that signal biological, or did groundwater rewrite the marrow with minerals after the fact? We test with statistics, compare to crocodiles, penguins, seals, hippos, and then discover every analogue we pick cheats in its own way. Crocs are ambush lungers. Penguins are winged torpedoes. Hippos don't hunt much, unless you count murder as foraging. None of them are 7-ton fish trappers with a giant billboard of spines on their backs, so every comparison comes stapled to an apology. Speaking of the back, the sail. If you like fights that never end, pull up a chair. Thermoregulation? Maybe it radiated heat like a badly designed radiator, or soaked sunshine like a living solar panel. Fat store? The spines are narrow for a camel's hump, but probably not isn't the same as no. Display? Absolutely. But display is what we call everything. We can't measure that still obviously does something to someone. Hydrodynamics? A dorsal keel changing roll dynamics underwater is a smart sentence until you test it, and the tests divide into A. Computer flows that live in a world with perfect inputs, and B. Glass tanks where plastic swims. The real animal, if you could talk it into a lab, would solve the matter in 5 indelicate minutes. Good luck with the time machine. Then there's gait, the old question with new teeth. Was this a sagging shoreline wader, a belly-deep stalker, a real swimmer in the mid-channel, or some obnoxious and efficient blend? Pelvis and femur proportions hint at a body that would rather push water than sprint across sand, but rather is not only. The arms are built like they belong to someone who uses them. The hands carry a big, honest hook of a claw on the first finger that looks persuading on land, useful in the shallows, and nearly irrelevant out in the middle. Every reconstruction you've seen is a treaty between fossils analogues, and the illustrator's sleep schedule. The signatures on those treaties change whenever a new bone walks into the room. And we are not done with time. Not all bones belong to the same age. Individuals change as they grow. We call that ontogeny, when we want to sound serious, and adolescence, when we want to be sympathetic. A juvenile carries different proportions. Heads grow slower or faster, tails add real estate, limbs bulk up or retire depending on lifestyle. Shift from a teenager with longer legs to an adult with a boat for a torso, and suddenly your locomotion model is 2 animals and 1 label. Did our river hunter get more aquatic with age? Did it start as a shore skulker and graduate into a mid-channel tax auditor? The fossil record hints and refuses to swear to it. Teeth complicate the honesty. They look straightforward, smooth cones that grip what flails. But replacement cycles differ. Micro-wear lies depending on the grit load in the river that year, and isotopes, those beautiful, infuriating chemical fingerprints we use to track diet and habitat, average behaviour over weeks or months. Spend 2 hungry weeks pilfering carrion on the bank, and your chemistry can make you look like a terrestrial villain. Spend the breeding season hunting deeper, and you come back with a watery signature and a lecture for anyone who wants to box you into one niche. You are what you eat, but only if the lab chooses the right tooth at the right moment from the right jaw and doesn't count a sandstorm as food. Add the acoustics of science itself, which is also a river. A roar in one direction one decade, quieter the next, then foaming again after a new scan, a new specimen, a new critique that points out a modelling assumption everyone had politely ignored. We do finite element analyses of skulls to see what they were stressed for, and then learn our boundary conditions were naive. We run CFD on virtual tails and forget that muscles get tired and animals cheat. We crunch statistics on bone density across hundreds of species, hit a lovely p-value, and someone else selects a different dataset and declares we have compared cantaloupes to anchors. The creature is real. The math is our way of leaning toward it with good intentions and messy hands. Even victory feels provisional. That tale, the one that turned tidy reconstructions into cautionary tales, it arrived because someone went back to the river and found a shape we hadn't been smart enough to imagine. Tomorrow the river can shrug up a forelimb with a new joint surface that forces everyone to redraw the posture chart and eat their old captions. Or a pelvis that says, actually, the legs were even weirder. Congratulations on your humility. The animal is not changing. Our map of it is. War, weather, and commerce are only the loud villains in this story of not knowing. The quiet villains are geometry and chance. This thing lived in a place that specialises in not preserving exactly the bones we need to be certain. Hips to fix stance, ankles to fix stride, complete skulls to fix sensor layout beyond doubt. It died in water that shreds assemblies and exports them. It's soaked in chemistry that edits. And then we dug it under sun with shovels and expectations. We call it a monster to make it feel large. What it really is, to us, is small. A few 100 kilograms of rock that used to be a conversation. We keep pretending we heard the whole thing, so we fill the silence with analogies and get burned just enough to remember our manners. Crocodiles teach us about pressure sensing and the power of stillness. Herons remind us that patience is a weapon. Gharials show what a long, narrow face does in water. Bears in salmon runs demonstrate that a clumsy body can be surgical when environment is an accomplice. But every time we get cozy, the fossil hands us something that doesn't fit anyone's life hack. Dense bones in a predator that isn't a hippo, a tail that is neither croc nor newt, arms that can do more than tweet, legs that refuse to be proud, is not a collage of animals we already know. It is itself. And that is the point. Infuriating and gorgeous. We don't know not because we aren't clever, but because the creature lived in a part of the world and a part of physics that are professionally hostile to knowing. Darkness is not only an environmental condition of its life, it is the condition of our evidence. The river blinded eyes and later our certainty. We work anyway. We CT what the storms haven't stolen. We model not to crown the model, but to see what breaks first. We argue like decent predators, silently, sometimes savagely, with respect for geometry, and the arguments are not a failure. They are the animals still hunting us. Out on that Cretaceous floodplain, rain turned noon to night and the water carried away what didn't hold fast. A hunter adapted to that truth and made a career out of feeling what others couldn't see. Now we crouch above its graveyard doing a coroner's job in the hurricane. We will never get all of it right. We will get some of it better. A tail discovered in a new layer, a jaw section that refuses old math. A bone whose density turns a headline into a footnote and a footnote into a quiet revolution. Each time the silhouette in our heads sharpens a little, the way shapes do when clouds thin but never quite part. We want a verdict. We have a dossier. We want a photograph. We have a dossier that sometimes edits itself when more pages wash in. That's not failure. That's paleontology in a river system. We are reconstructing an animal that made a weapon out of opacity, and the fossil record is mirroring its trick. You can be angry at the dark, or you can train your senses and live with the taste of iron in your mouth and the patience to wait for another ripple. We'll keep listening. The answers are in there, moving, loud and low, overlapped by noise, arriving out of order the way the river arranges everything else it loves.